It's Mo. I'm back with chips and three big, well, two little and one big box of books from the basement, and it is time to do another basement box book haul, unboxing, unhaul, all of the things. Because this year, a project that I'm doing is going through the hundreds of books in my basement, some of them still from when we moved here in 2015, and unhauling, doing a major unhaul, seeing if any of the books need to go back in the basement, seeing if any need to go on my TBR, but hopefully unhauling quite a bit. In the first video of these, I started putting books in a box again, and I'm only about a little over halfway full. I did either put on my TBR or unhaul more than half of the books that I picked out of the first two boxes, and I filled up half a box to go back in the basement. Today we're going to go through these three boxes, see how many books are in each, and what I will be keeping, what I will be unhauling, what will go on my TBR. So let's get into the first box. This first box is mostly books from my father that he gave us. He's been going through his books as well and trying to get rid of books, so he's been giving us a lot of books. This one actually he gave us kind of a long time ago, so we just put it down in the basement. We didn't really go through any of the books. Since the new year, we've been going through the books that he gives us and deciding whether we're going to keep them or get rid of them before we just put them in the basement. So the first book we have is The Listeners, a novel by James E. Gunn. I've never heard of this book. I've never heard of this author, but I do really like the cover a lot. A lot of the books that my dad gives us are like vintage sci-fi books, so I have a feeling that this is probably the same. And for these books, I'm gonna have to look at each of them a little bit more, which is both fun and annoying because I don't know if I really will want to keep them until I figure out what they're about. This one seems really interesting, actually. It seems to be about a Puerto Rican satellite and the people listening to it, so I'm gonna put this in the keep pile. The first box has 15 books in it. They're not usually so easy to tell. The next book is The World Meanders by Lloyd Biggle Jr. This is another very cool cover, another vintage sci-fi. This one seems to be like an epic sci-fi slash fantasy. That's not usually my thing, so I'm going to put this in a pile that my husband can look at. If he decides he wants to keep it, we'll keep it, but if he decides to let it go, we can let it go. The next book in the box is The Changeling Land by Roger Zelensky. This is another one. Seems more like fantasy than sci-fi, so that's a no from me, but we'll see if my husband wants it. Next we have To the Stars by Harry Harrison. Harry Harrison is the first of these books that I've recognized the name of a classic or vintage sci-fi author. This book is a trilogy, and it is the entire trilogy, so I think this will go on the keep pile. Next we have Farnahan's Freehold by Robert A. Heinlein. I've only read a couple by Heinlein, but I really like his books, so we can go ahead and keep this one. All the books that I'm saying I'm going to keep, though, are going to go back in the basement probably. They'll go into this box here, and then we'll see if there's any that need to go on my TBR. The next book in the pile is Dangerous Visions, 33 original stories, edited by Harlan Ellison, so that is really interesting. That's probably not sci-fi, if I had to guess. Oh, it is sci-fi. So this is a collection of sci-fi stories. Isaac Asimov, Harlan Ellison, Lester Del Rey, Frederick Pohl, Philip Jose Farmer, a lot of people that I like, Philip K. Dick, Larry Niven. There's check marks next to the stories, so it looks like somebody has read some of these 33. Poul Anderson. These are all authors that we enjoy, so I will be keeping this one. Next we have The Life Ship by Harry Harrison and Gordon R. Dixon. This is another great cover, great vintage cover. I mean, if I were keeping them based on cover alone, I would keep every single one of them. This one is quite water damaged. This one says a fast-paced, suspenseful novel about a ship being sabotaged. Sounds fun. I think we'll keep that one. We have John Varley, The Apache Hotline. This is a very sexy lady cover. I like that. Some planets. Ooh, this seems like it's about clones. That's a keeper. Love clones. Here is a Philip Jose Farmer, The Unreasoning Mask. I will keep all Philip Jose Farmer books because I really enjoy Philip Jose Farmer. I can't say it enough. Another great cover, Engine Summer by John Crowley. This has a cat on it. This seems to take place in a future where the population has dwindled and each little pocket of population has become a different culture. So that one sounds really interesting. Here's another Roger Zelazny, Changeling. This might be part of that other Ooh, there's dragons on the back. Yeah, this one's definitely more fantasy. I'll let my husband decide on that one. Here we have a new novel by Robert A. Heinlein, So I Will Fear No Evil. We'll definitely keep that one. Necromancer by Gordon R. Dixon. I love that this cover is not shiny. It's like a matte finish. About necromancy. Sounds interesting. This is a collection of short stories by Thomas M. Ditch, and it is Fun with Your New Head. It's got a Medusa on the cover. Very cool. Short story collection, probably worth keeping. Finally, in this box, we have Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. This is like a library copy. It's quite large. I'm inclined to keep this one and just put it on my red shelf because I have read this book before, and I don't think I have a nice copy like this. I think I only have like a little mass market paperback, so this will be the first one that we keep, but it'll go on the red shelf as opposed to back in the box. Out of those 15 books, we're only getting rid of 3, and we're keeping the rest, so 12. Next, we have another smaller box. Let's see what we've got in here. The first book we have is Mome, which is a collection of graphic stories, so comic stories. I will definitely be keeping this one. Basically all the comics that come out of here, or the majority of the comics so far, I've kept. We have various comic shelves around the house, so they will go on those comic shelves. Mephisto and the Empty Box. This looks maybe like just an indie comic that I picked up somewhere. That one looks cool. This is Some of Me by Isabella Rossellini. This is one of her autobiographies, and I've actually read this book, and it can just go on my red shelf. So that's fun. I'm not quite sure why it wasn't on my red shelf already, but good to know. Here's a classic, Fathers and Sons by Ivan Chervenev. This is a translated work, a Russian translated work. I don't ever see myself reading this. I'm not a big classic person. I'm not a person who reads a lot of especially classic Russian literature. I do like some. This is a book that I've heard of, but if it was already on my radar of something I would like to read, I would have read it already, or I would already have it, or I would say I will keep it out of this box. But since it's not any of those things, I'm going to go ahead and unhaul this one. Here's another graphic novel. This is Wet Moon, Book 1 by Ross Campbell. I remember getting this. I don't know if I've ever actually read it though, but we will be keeping that one. Oh, here's a teeny tiny little Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens by J.M. Barrie. That is so cute. This is the first book I'm going to put on my TBR. I've read Peter Pan before, but this is like a little supplementary story, I believe, so I'm excited to try that one. Here's another teeny tiny little book. It's How to Write Love Poems That Don't Suck by Delia's. Do you remember Delia's? Oh my god, I'm such a 90s kid. I loved Delia's. I loved their clothing. I loved their catalogs. I loved their CDs, and this is like a little instructional book. Very cute. I think I'm going to put this one on my TBR as well. Another graphic novel. This is Last Exit Before Toll by Neil Schaefer, Christopher Mitten, and Dawn Pietrusco. We'll keep this, put it with the graphic novels. Next we have our first of the Sherlock Holmes books. This is Sherlock Holmes and the Case of Sabina Hall by L.B. Greenwood. So a friend of ours, a dear friend, has given me about 1 million Sherlock Holmes books over the years, which I deeply appreciate, but unfortunately I haven't been able to get to most of them. I love Sherlock Holmes. I love Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, but I have enjoyed Sherlock Holmes related books as well. Since they've been boxed up for close to 10 years, I'm not really sure if I want to keep very many of them. So we will be going through them in this series and unhauling most of them. This one actually sounds kind of interesting and is notable because it says it's told in the voice of Arthur Conan Doyle. I also have a friend named Sabina, so I think I'm going to keep this one out, maybe try a chapter of it, and then if I don't like it, maybe give it to her just for fun. She's a reader too. I don't know if she likes Sherlock Holmes, but it would be cute. Here is Half Magic by Edward Eager. This looks to be a middle grade or young adult book. There's a bookmark in it, so I probably read it at some point. This is one of my Japanese hiragana flashcards. The cover is by Quentin Blake, which could also be one of the reasons that I picked it up. This seems like very much a British young adult novel. I don't think I'm interested in this, so I'm going to put it in the unhaul pile. Here is a nonfiction book on killing, the psychological cost of learning to kill in war and society by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. I don't think this was my book. I think this was probably my husband's. I'm not interested in it, but we will see if maybe he still is. Here's another nonfiction. This is Orphans, Mayhem, Terror, and it is The Black Diamond Detective Agency, a rousing tale of the hunt for a mysterious train bomber. It seems to be by Eddie Campbell, based on a manuscript of kinematic play by Mr. C. Gabby Mitchell. So actually maybe this isn't a nonfiction. Oh, it's not at all. Well, I mean, it could still be a nonfiction, but it's actually a graphic novel. I hate this cover. I don't know. I'm not really interested in this. I'm going to put it in the unhaul pile. This is a great vintage cover. It is The Baroness, Black Gold by Paul Kenyon. I'm going to keep this based just on the cover. It looks incredible, vintage, but it will be going in the basement. Here's another great vintage cover. It is The Complete Werewolf and Other Tales of Fantasy and Science Fiction by Anthony Boucher. Oh, there's $1 in there. I feel like I've recently heard something about Anthony Boucher. I'm going to keep this one, put it in the basement. Here we have A Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Now, I've heard so many mixed things about this. People like my mother and my father really love this book. They were born or grew up in the 50s, 60s, or 70s, and I think that's when this book kind of really made an impact. But I've heard modern readers read this book and really dislike it. So this is like a maybe. This is my first maybe. I feel like I should keep it because it's a vintage copy. I feel like I should keep it because my father has suggested I read it before, but will I like it? Next, we have More Pricks Than Kicks by Samuel Beckett. This is a collection of stories. I'm definitely going to be keeping this, and I am actually going to put this on my TBR because we've recently been talking a lot about Samuel Beckett. My father and I went to see a play with Samuel Beckett's work in it recently, and my dad got me Waiting for Godot for Christmas, so I think this is a good one to keep out on the TBR. Interesting. So here is After Dark by Haruki Murakami. I read my first Murakami in 2023 and I enjoyed it, but I also made a video saying that I probably would never read another Murakami again, but here's one that I own that I didn't even know I owned. This work was translated from the Japanese by J. Rubin, and I have been told to try more of his work. I think this is gonna have to be a keeper, but a basement book. Here is The Whitechapel Horrors, a Sherlock Holmes novel by Edward B. Hanna. I would assume because this is in Whitechapel that it is about Jack the Ripper. I think I can go ahead and unhaul this one because, again, I'm just not going to be reading all of the Sherlock books that I have. This one is almost 400 pages, so that's a no. Okay, so out of those, we have some comics, which are going to go on the comic shelf. We have one book that's going on the red shelf. We have 3 books that are going on the TBR. 1 book that is getting put in a try a chapter. 5 books that are getting unhauled. 3 books that are going in the basement box books. And 1 book that's a maybe. That's the second box we've done in this video, but the 4th box that we've done all together. Let's pull over the big box now. First book, we have Red Planet by Robert A. Heinlein. We're keeping all Robert A. Heinleins. This is interesting. I recently saw somebody look at this book. This is J.J. Abrams and Doug Dorst's S, which is a book within a book, and within this book there's all these like multimedia things, and it's like a puzzle. I think it's kind of a ripoff a little bit of like House of Leaves. This is one that I'm still super interested in, will be keeping, but do not need on my TBR. Here we have The Deceivers by Fred Bester. This seems to be a vintage sci-fi. Beautiful illustration there. I don't know, I think this one is worth keeping in the basement box books. Next we have Poul Anderson, Orion Shall Rise. This is a favorite sci-fi author of my husband's, so we can keep this one. Oh, interesting. So this is a literary magazine from my husband's young adulthood. It has a picture of a person, I have no idea who that is, a small child. So this one is not for me to decide, that one's for him to decide. It seems to be a like daily diary with like horrible things that happened. What year is this from? It's from the year 2000, so this is a weird one. I'm definitely getting rid of it, but how do I get rid of that? Here is a giant book that is Song and Dance Man, The Art of Bob Dylan. I don't need this. I don't think that my husband needs this. We probably got this from a friend, so that's going in the unhaul as well. This is another version of that literary magazine. Here's Poems for Children by Eugene Field. This is just what it says on the tin, a collection of children's poetry, and there's a note in here that says, as I was looking through this book, I found this happy little poem, What Child Wouldn't Love? And it is signed A, it looks like. I feel like this one is worth keeping, but could go in the basement. Next, we have The Early History of Surgery by W.J. Bishop. I feel like these are mostly my husband's books, actually. Here's a very old photograph of something. I am not interested in this, but perhaps he is. We have Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. This is a just mass market paperback, so not interested. Re what I said about Russian classics. Here's a copy of The Bell Jar with no cover. I think this one can probably go. This is Kafka, which says the definitive edition of the Eisner-nominated noir thriller, and it is by Stephen T. Seagal and Stefano Guadiano. I feel like I have heard of this. I'm going to put it in the comics. Here we have a copy of Barrel Fever by David Sedaris. I had a David Sedaris moment. I think some friends of mine really liked him and I ended up reading some. There is a tab in this book, so I'm guessing it came from someone else since I don't tab books, but I do not need it now. I'm not really going to be reading any David Sedaris anytime soon. The next book is The Names by Don DeLillo. I read a Don DeLillo in 2023 and I really, really disliked it. There are some photos of people with fish. I don't know who these people are. I've never seen those photos before in my life as far as I know. I do not need to keep this. We'll be unhauling. The next book is a little pamphlet nonfiction, and it is called The Crisis of U.S. Capitalism and the Fight Back by Gus Hall. It sounds absolutely incredible. Definitely want to keep this. Like I said, I have a feeling that a lot of these were my husband's book and not mine, because next we have What's MIDI by John F. Each, Making Musical Instruments Work Together. That's a no for me, but we'll have him look at it. Commentaries on New Media Arts, textbook of some variety. Again, not mine. We have most of the copy of King Arthur and His Knights, which is a very old looking vintage copy. Absolutely beautiful, but quite destroyed. I would say that this one is a keeper. Here is another possibly university book, Fire in the Brain, Clinical Tales of Hallucination. This is a maybe. There was a memoir recently, which I think was called Fire on the Brain, and that one I do have. I can't remember the author's name, but it's supposed to be a really interesting look at a mental breakdown. Hunter S. Thompson, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Savage Journey to the Heart of the American Dream. I've read this book, but this is probably my husband's copy. It's a great copy though. Definitely keeping it. Definitely putting it on the shelf, the red shelf. It's On Love and Loneliness by Krishnamurti. I've read one book of his philosophy before. Oh my god, and here's a Saturn repair for your Saturn car. So he's gonna love looking at that. Amazing. Next is King Ink by Nick Cave. This book looks incredible. It is, Poems and Lyrics by Nick Cave. Amazing. This one I would keep out, actually. Here's Billy Hazelnuts by Tony Millionaire. I'm not a huge fan of Tony Millionaire necessarily. This one looks pretty cool though. I'm going to keep that one in the comics section. This looks like a literary and art magazine. We have the Metropolitan Museum of Art Bulletin magazine. Amazing. Incredible. Voodoo Child, The Illustrated Legend of Jimi Hendrix by Martin I. Green and Bill Sienowitz. I've definitely seen this art before. We'll be keeping that. Stephen King, The Drawing of the Three, The Dark Tower #2. My husband really loves the Dark Tower books. I've never read them, but we can definitely put this on our red shelf. Bag of Surprises by Shinichi Hoshi, translated by Stanley H. Jones. I'm not sure what this book is about, but it is part in Japanese. We'll definitely be keeping that and putting it in the TBR, on the TBR. Snow White, a novel by Donald Barthelme. I've never heard of this. I don't think it is the actual Snow White fairy tale. Interested in that, definitely keeping it. The Big Snow by David Park. This is a historical fiction set in 1963 in Ireland by an Irish author. Definitely keeping that. I think we could put that on the TBR. Next we have Waiting for Godot, Who Knew? And this is clearly a copy that has been well loved. Keeping that. Philosophy of Communism. This looks to be a textbook nonfiction, and it is by Charles J. McFadden. Essays from the Sketchbook by Washington Irving. This looks like an absolutely cool vintage book. Love it. Riders on the Storm, My Life with Jim Morrison and the Doors by John Densmore. I don't necessarily want to keep this. My husband does love the Doors, so we'll see. Already Dead, a California Gothic by Dennis Johnson. I've never read any Dennis Johnson yet, but I know that people really love his like crime noir literary fiction books, so I would say this is a keeper. This is Baseball Research Journal, 10th Annual Historical and Statistical Review, Society for America from 1981. One of the last books in here is Thomas de Quincey's Confession of an English Opium Eater. Here is a tiny pamphlet, Crossing the Gate of Death in Chinese Buddhist Culture. It's amazing. And lastly, we have a harmonica music pocketbook. Out of that last batch, we have 9 books that I would get rid of that my husband has to look at, quite a few literary magazines and pamphlets that my husband has to look at, 14 books, I'm not going to hold them all up, of books that I would put back in the basement, 3 comics that I would definitely keep. Okay, hold steady, buddy. 4 small books that I would put on the TBR, 2 books that will go on the red shelf. Join me soon for another basement box unboxing. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!